My name is Maria. To the outside world, my life looked like an absolute dream, a modern fairy tale painted in shades of gold, marble, and endless privilege. I lived in a sprawling, multi-story estate on the outskirts of the city, a house built by my father-in-law, an intimidating, highly disciplined, retired military general whose shadow still seemed to linger in every grand hallway and high-ceilinged room. I grew up as a deeply loved, fiercely protected girl. In my parental home, my mother, father, and younger brother treated me like a princess. I was headstrong, proud of my appearance, and completely unused to rejection. When I married my husband, Zain, I expected a partnership filled with passion, late-night conversations, and mutual adoration. Instead, I inherited a magnificent cage. Zain was a man consumed by an invisible weight. He worked grueling hours at his corporate firm, but his exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The moment he stepped through the front doors of the mansion, he became a ghost. He barely looked at me. When I wore my finest clothes, he passed by me without a glance. When I tried to initiate conversation, to ask him why he was so distant, he would snap. His temper was a volatile, unpredictable thing. There were nights when his voice shook the walls, and a few terrifying occasions where his anger crossed the line into physical intimidation, leaving me sobbing, isolated, and completely emotionally starved in our king-sized bed. Day after day, I sat in that massive house, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock, wondering how a woman so young and full of life could feel so utterly buried alive. The turning point of my existence arrived on a Tuesday in late May. The sky had turned an ominous, bruised purple, and the local news warned of a severe, unrelenting storm that was shutting down the city. My mother-in-law had left early that morning to attend a distant relative's wedding in another province, expecting to be gone for at least a week. Zain had called me from his office, his voice clipped and cold, telling me that the flooded roads meant he would be stuck downtown overnight. For the first time in months, I was completely alone in the massive ancestral estate. By 10 p.m., the rain was a relentless drumbeat against the glass panes. The wind howled through the courtyard, making the old chandeliers sway. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a shawl, trying to calm the restless energy vibrating in my chest. Suddenly, a sound broke through the noise of the tempest. It wasn't a casual knock. It was a desperate, heavy pounding against the massive mahogany front doors. My heart leaped into my throat. I stood up, my pulse racing. Who could possibly be out in a storm like this? I walked down the long shadowed foyer, my footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Peering through the small glass viewing pane, I saw the silhouette of a young woman. She was completely drenched, shivering violently, and clutching a heavy vintage leather briefcase tightly against her torso, as if her life depended on it. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. A blast of cold, wet wind rushed into the foyer, bringing the stranger with it. "Please," she gasped, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "Please, help me. My car broke down a mile away. The roads are flooding. My phone is completely dead, and I saw the lights of this house." I looked at her. She appeared young, perhaps in her early 20s, but her eyes possessed a strange, piercing intensity that didn't match her fragile, shivering frame. Despite the danger of letting a stranger in, my innate sense of hospitality and perhaps my own desperate loneliness took over. "Come inside," I said, pulling her into the warmth of the hallway. "Quickly, before you catch pneumonia." I brought her a thick, dry towel and a warm change of clothes. As she dried herself off in the grand living room, she introduced herself as Nita. "I am a distant relative of the late general," she murmured, looking around the opulent room with a gaze that seemed far too familiar, far too calculating for a first-time visitor. "My grandfather served alongside him years ago. I was traveling to the city for an interview when the storm trapped me." "You know my father-in-law's history?" I asked, setting down a mug of hot tea for her. "Everyone in our circle knows the general," Nita said, a small, unreadable smile playing on her lips. "He was a man of absolute power, a man who kept flawless records, a man who knew how to manage people and how to keep secrets." Her choice of words sent a faint shiver down my spine, but I brushed it off. I was simply grateful for human company. For the next hour, we sat and talked. Nita was an exceptional listener. She had a way of looking at me that made me feel entirely exposed, as if she could see the profound unhappiness radiating from my soul. Before I knew it, the isolation of the past year caught up to me. I found myself revealing things I had never breathed to another living soul. I told her about Zain's coldness, his complete lack of affection, his explosive temper, and the bitter reality of my unfulfilled, lonely marriage. Nita listened with intense gravity, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fireplace. "A beautiful woman like you shouldn't be hidden away in a dark house, Mehak," Nita said softly, her voice dropping to a low, hypnotic cadence. "A weak man like Zain doesn't know how to appreciate the fire inside you." His father, the general, now he was a man of real power. Zain is just a pale, fragile imitation of his father's legacy. Hearing her speak about my husband with such blunt disrespect shocked me, yet a twisted part of my mind agreed with her completely. I felt a dangerous, unholy connection forming between myself and this mysterious guest. By midnight, the storm showed no signs of stopping. I showed Nita to the luxurious guest wing on the far side of the mansion. "Sleep well," I told her at the doorway. "Oh, I will," Nita replied, clutching her vintage leather briefcase tightly. "But remember, Mehak, in a house this big, the walls always have ears, and sometimes the dead speak louder than the living." I returned to my bedroom, but sleep was an impossibility. Nita's words twisted and turned in my mind like a fever dream. The house felt heavier now, charged with an unsettling, electric suspense. At 2 a.m., driven by a restless thirst and an overwhelming sense of dread, I stepped out of my room. The mansion was pitch black, save for the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the tall windows. As I walked down the grand corridor toward the kitchen, I froze. A faint, flickering light was visible at the far end of the hallway. It was coming from beneath the door of the general's old study, a room that had remained strictly locked and prohibited since his passing 3 years ago. Zain carried the only key, and he was supposed to be miles away in the city center. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. Was it a burglar? Had the storm caused an electrical short? Moving like a shadow, I crept down the hallway, pressing my back against the cold wall. As I reached the heavy oak door of the forbidden study, I realized it was slightly ajar. I pressed my ear against the gap. From inside, I didn't hear the rough movements of a thief. I heard the faint, distinct rustle of heavy paper, followed by the low, sharp sound of a voice. It was Nita. She was speaking into a burner phone, her tone completely stripped of the innocent, fragile vulnerability she had displayed earlier. Now, she sounded cold, professional, and terrifyingly calculated. "I'm inside the house," Nita whispered urgently into the receiver. "The wife is completely clueless. She's miserable, lonely, and practically handed me the layout of the family dynamics on a silver platter. I've already bypassed the lock on the general's desk." There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end of the line. "Yes, I'm looking at the ledger right now," Nita continued, her voice filled with a chilling malice. "The old general's secret files are all here. The offshore accounts, the real reason he abruptly retired from the military, and the evidence of the blackmail money. If Zain or the public finds out what the general did to build this family's fortune, their entire legacy will crumble to ashes in a single day. The scandal will ruin them permanently." My breath caught in my throat. My hands began to shake violently. The wealth, the mansion, the pristine reputation of my father-in-law, it was all built on a foundation of lies and corruption. And the girl sleeping under my roof was an operative sent to destroy us. In my panic, I stepped back blindly. My heel caught the edge of a heavy antique bronze planter sitting in the hallway. It scraped loudly against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent mansion. Inside the study, the whispering instantly stopped. Total, suffocating silence fell over the hallway. I stood paralyzed, unable to run, my lungs screaming for air. The heavy oak door of the study swung wide open. Nita stood in the doorway, holding a vintage flashlight in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. The beam of the flashlight blinded me for a second, illuminating the terrifying, victorious smile spreading across her face. Well, Nita said softly, her voice dripping with amusement as she lowered the light. "You shouldn't be wandering the halls at night, Mehak. Curiosity is a very dangerous trait in a house built on secrets." "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. "Get out of my house, or I will call the police right now." Nita laughed, a cold, mocking sound that sent ice through my veins. She stepped closer, cornering me against the hallway wall. "Call the police? Go ahead," she said.